This programme was produced at and first aired on MPR, Manawatu People's Radio, with support from New Zealand On Air. Ka pai Irarangi Tamotu, MPR.
Kia ora and welcome to Reserved Recommendations. This is a show about great trash, difficult art, and our complicated relationships with art and culture. My name's Hugh, I'm the host of the show, and I'd like to take this opportunity to put in a very mild content warning for the show as a whole. Sometimes our recommendations on this show are reserved just because the thing that we're discussing is in some way not good, but sometimes there are aspects of the art or artist that may be confronting for some people. Check the episode descriptions for more information, and do be aware of your listening environment. Alright, welcome back. This is another episode of Reserved Recommendations, a radio show and podcast from Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o Ngā Tangata o Manawatu. We talk about great trash and problematic faves, and we'll get to that in a second, but first let me introduce my brother Gus, returning champion. Lovely to have you back on the pod talking about things. Just to reassure international listeners, I am not underwater.
But did you have to kayak to work today?
No, actually, we got off very lightly. So the north of the North Island got absolutely hammered, and I'm just doing compass points in my head. Basically, the coasts, but particularly Hawke's Bay, so like Napier and Hastings, places like that, also got an absolute kicking, and they're looking pretty rough. I think we're looking at like 9,000 people displaced, something like that, which, considering the kind of disaster infrastructure New Zealand has, is pretty bad. Like, normally the thing about disasters in New Zealand is that the human cost tends not to be that bad on an international scale, just because like we're pretty good at fixing stuff. But here in Palmy, we had like some howling gales, which we get anyway, and some heavy rain. But my street didn't even go underwater, which it has with much less rain in previous years. So, I'm all in all pretty pleased. I think that's probably that there were like stormwater pumps that were slow to kick into action in the past, and the council was just like, everything run full speed this time around, because they were expecting worse than we got.
Yes, yeah. No, that's good to hear. Well, I mean, good to hear for you, but also...
Yeah, also, like even the Conservative political party have started making noises about taking climate change seriously, which is nice. And it's also caused the hilarious phenomenon of like one of New Zealand's right-wing Twitter nuts, a guy called Red Beta, who I think had been banned and then reinstated by Elon, starting to like rant about how the National Party is secret communists and greenies and coming to take your tractor, which is
excellent, of course.
Yeah, like it's good. It's I fully support his transition into like absolute derangement as opposed to just like nasty right-wing boomerism.
He's just a normal man having a very normal day.
Yeah. A sequence of very normal days, it looks like. Yes. Anyhow, we're not talking about climate disasters. We are talking about, something that might be a disaster, because, like, I am fascinated by the mystery of this movie, and we can maybe get into that towards the end of the episode, because I feel like something happened, and there is no record of what. But what we're talking about is the 1993 or 1994 movie, depending on how you count it, The Punk, which, like...
Also known as The Punk and the Princess.
Yeah, I believe that was the name it got for American release. And the thing about this movie is that you and I saw it as teenagers, probably like 3 or 4 years after it came out. And it was like on TV late at night in New Zealand a couple of times. It was in local video stores. It had enough of an impact on our circle of friends that rewatching it with my wife, like there were phrases that people would say, and I would be like, pointing at the screen because they became kind of memetic in teenage circles that we were moving in, but nobody knows about it as far as I can tell, at least.
No, exactly. Like, I think there were, definitely phrases that moved into popular use within our friend group that came from that movie in particular.
So as an example, there's a scene towards the end of the movie where someone produces a Stanley knife as a threat and says, I think it's time you met my mate Stan. And we have at work a Stanley toolbox, one of those stackable ones where you can like clip them together into a larger toolbox full of connectors and cables and things, which is to this day affectionately referred to as the box of Stan, which is a direct reference to that movie, and nobody understands it.
Excellent.
So by way of setting the table, what we're talking about is a low-budget British movie. It did the art house circuit, I believe, like it was in film festivals and things. It is a riff on Romeo and Juliet rather than a direct adaptation. Like it kind of does its versions of characters and iconic scenes, but it doesn't by any stretch directly follow the plot. And it stars a very young Charlie Creed Miles, who went on to like have this kind of almost ran career. He's still acting. He was in like The Fifth Element in a small role. He was in a whole bunch of TV. He was like in The Bill. He was, do you remember the movie Harry Brown where, what's his face? Michael Caine plays an elderly murder guy. That's probably a Michael Caine. That's probably a Michael Caine movie that befitting of this podcast. Oh yeah, I mean that's probably an episode of it. So it's a movie that if people are not familiar with, do oblique podcast recommendations. But if people have not listened to Kill James Bond, firstly they should, and secondly, I reckon Harry Brown is. Would be fit for a Kill James Bond episode as well. It has ideas about masculinity. But anyway, yes. Charlie Creed Miles is one of the two cops who follows Michael Caine's roaring rampage of revenge in that movie. He got married to the woman who played Edwina's long-suffering daughter, Safi, in Absolutely Fabulous. So he's been like around the periphery of things, but he's his first time heading a movie since, I think, was this thing called Wild Bill, which came out like 5 or 10 years ago, where he plays like a reformed crim trying to go straight. And it's a sort of like an attempt to get the kind of lock stock style of British crime drama and then like look at the human consequences of it. It's kind of interesting. And he's good in it. In my view, but like he never quite broke through as a movie star, I think.
No.
It's also Vanessa Haddaway is the love interest, the Juliet, if you like. Again, like an extensive career in TV, but never had like grand leading lady status, and she's good in this movie, I think.
Yeah.
And so I want to know what happened, and I have no way of finding out.
So, because I just trying to refresh my mind about this movie and going to its IMDb page, I saw that it had a movie poster, and I looked at that movie poster, and it had a review a quote from a review in The Guardian. So I have been quietly trying to Google the Punk and Princess review from The Guardian, which I cannot find. But what I have found is that apparently this is based on a book called The Punk. Sorry. A cult book called The Punk, which was written by a man named Gideon Sams when he was all of 14.
Yeah.
Which is, again, which in of itself was a reworking of Romeo and Juliet. So
I've actually read the book. It's awful.
Yes. Yes.
It's really quite bad. It shows being written by a 14-year-old. It's like weirdly spiteful and kind of pointlessly nihilistic, and has this like, and then they died and everyone was sorry for being mean to them because they're mean to me because I'm 14 kind of ending.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it would have a huge degree of significance if Gideon Sams hadn't like died at 21 in his first New York winter, which is like a thing that's mentioned in the credits of the movie. It's fascinating. Like clearly the book connected with these people and it was a passion project for them. It's just because for whatever reason it didn't connect. And these people didn't have the careers they expected. Charlie Creed Miles did almost all the music for it, if you look at the credits. So it was clearly an attempt to launch him as like a double, if not triple threat. But because it didn't make that connection, it never, as far as I know, got a Blu-ray, a DVD release, let alone Blu-ray. And we had to watch it again for this episode on a version that was like taped from TV and then digitized, and is like just utter garbage as far as picture quality. Like,
and it includes like a pitch to what's coming up next over the end credits and other such things.
And like the resolution is so low that every time, because it's shot on site in it says where it's shot in London, I forget, but in like lower class bits of London, it was shot on location. So there's a lot of brick is what I'm saying. There's a lot of brick and a lot of concrete. And anytime there's anything with that kind of a grid pattern in the background of a shot, it's just constantly dancing and fritzing out all over the place because the resolution can't keep up with it.
Yeah. And like it's also interesting. Like I was saying, we're talking about technical stuff because there's like, I think I'm stealing this entirely from Kill Jane Bond. This was before editing was invented.
So I wonder about that.
Before modern editing was invented.
So I wonder about that because last week's episode was about the movie Dark Star, which so Dark Star started as a student film and then was expanded until into a full feature-length movie. And the way they did that was largely by filming fucking about. And so, like, the thing about Dark Star is it does have this sort of, like, setup and then exploration of the premise and then payoff. It's just in between all of that, there's all of this, like, slightly aimless, this fairly aimless stuff where like the crew of the spaceship like bicker and fuck around with homemade musical instruments and do the like knifey finger thing that will then be repeated to great effect in Alien. And like there's just a whole bunch of like aimless faffing about on a spaceship. And that feels disconnected because it was literally a product of reshoots. And I wonder if there was a similar like, I don't know if it's like started as a short film and then was expanded, or if it was just that because the original book is it's incredibly short. It's like 5 chapters or something, and the chapters are all 10 pages long. Like it's really, really brief. I wonder if there was a dearth of script, and so they like expanded the movie by adding in a whole bunch of fucking about, which is great fucking about. It's one of the things I love about the movie.
Well, like, it's not even the fucking about. It's just like, if you watch modern media or even modern staging, like if you went to if you went to your local TV channel and turned it on now and watched a show, or went to a local theatre, you would have a much quicker sense of pacing. And in film, that can sometimes come from editing, where you choose to cut and move to the next thing, and cut to move to the next thing. And this movie is just lacking that modern sensibility of having pace to move along.
Yeah. I guess the reason that I was talking about fucking about is that one of the things that it does is that it's interested at the same time as doing its Romeo and Juliet thing. It's interested in trying to be a sort of socially realist snapshot of what life was like for poor people in London at the time. And so there's a whole subplot about what's the kid's name? Is it Daniel? David.
Yeah,
David is the name of the punk. There's a whole subplot about David needing to move out of his house because he doesn't get on with his dad, and finding a squat. And then you see him like go through the process of finding this house, and it makes sure to pan over the graffiti that says like 40,000 empty homes, why 40,000 homeless. I don't know if I've got those numbers right, but you get to see him go through the process of breaking into the house and setting himself up there. And then you get this fairly long interlude of him just like sitting by the fire, jamming by himself on an acoustic guitar, doing like beatboxing and jazzy classical guitar to nobody. And there's like a whole subplot about him getting a job at a fishmonger. And like a lot of that stuff you could pair out of the plot quite easily. All the pool and snooker stuff as well. Like there's a lot of scenes of characters playing pool and snooker, which like sets up that David is good at it, but doesn't, like, the fact that he's a good snooker player doesn't play into the story at all.
No. Like I think there is definitely a little, like, I kind of realized that this feels like what it was meant to be was Michael Sarnes and Charlie Creed Miles, like Shallow Grave. Are you familiar with Shallow Grave?
No, I've never seen. That's like an early Ewan McGregor movie, right? It's
like the first kind of big Ewan McGregor movie. It was like it's shot in 1993 on a half decent film stock, so it's it's not bad looking, but it is definitely it feels like a student film, right? Like it has that feel to it, but it kind of like put eyeballs on Ewan McGregor and some other people and catapulted them into onto better things. And I have a feeling that this was meant to be somebody's Shallow Grave.
Yeah. I mean, so you mentioned Mike San, who is the director, and he's an interesting bloke because he is most known as like an actor and had a couple of like singles in the 1960s. He produced a few things, but he only directed 3 movies, including this, I think. A couple of sort of, I haven't gone and watched them, but I get the sense that they're either sex comedies or sex dramas in the late 60s and early 70s. So, yeah, maybe this was his his attempt to kind of go legit after a fairly long break, because, like I say, his previous directing thing had been in 1970.
Yeah, no, like because as I say, it feels like it's somebody's things out of somebody's attempt at a springboard to something in some ways. Shall we talk kind of about it of itself?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the mystery of it is the thing that has intrigued me all of these years and led to me eventually coming back to it and going, like, what the hell, actually? But all of these questions don't really have answers. So, yeah, I think what we might do is we might take our halfway break now, even though it's slightly early for where we normally do it. And we will talk a bit about like the movie as a movie after this.
Support this show and others like it by giving a donation. For more information, go to www.mpr.nz/donate.
And we're back. You're listening to Reserved Recommendations on Manawatu People's Radio today, Irarangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. I'm talking today to my brother Gus, all the way from Glasgow, where I'm sure there is weather and light happening of some sort. I have neither of those things because I'm recording this episode in the studio at work, so I am thoroughly in an insulated cave. Anyway, we are talking about the, like, I was going to call it cult, but it's like, I don't know, super cult, because it's basically impossible to find movie The Punk, also known as The Punk and the Princess, which was directed by mostly actor and sometime pop singer rather than particularly movie director Michael San. Featured a very young Charlie Creed-Miles, Vanessa Haddaway, both of whom went on to do various things but never quite be giant stars. We were going to talk a bit about it as a movie. So how did you, because it, like, the reason this is stuck in our heads is both of us encountered it as teenagers and it kind of made a dent in our brains. Like, how do you feel like it holds up rewatching it now?
In short, this movie is not good. I think it's fascinatingly not good, right? Like, it's not good in a quite fascinating way, because there are, like, layers of cowardice, naivety, and kind of rose-tintedness that, like, layer on top to make this kind of weirdly not very good.
So I guess I felt like slightly more sympathetic to it than that. I still find the central performances by Charlie Creed-Miles and Vanessa Haddaway quite compelling.
Yeah.
What I would definitely say is that there's a lot of strange choices that were made, and those do lend the movie a kind of surreal vibe. I would also say as well, like we mentioned in the first half, that there is a lot of fucking about in this movie. And by and large, I do actually find the fucking about kind of charming, despite the fact that it doesn't really contribute to the forward momentum of the movie. One of the things that I think is kind of emblematic of odd choices, and I think your term cowardice was very interesting, and I want to get into that. But is this that the movie it was made presumably through like 1991 and 1992. It was released in 93 from memory, and it's about punks who were, in Britain at least, kind of like a 70s through 80s phenomenon. They weren't, like, 1993 wasn't really like prime punk era. the setting as a result is kind of strange. Like, they're trying to do this social realist look at a bit of London life, and in some ways, because they're just shot on location with natural light, and I think a lot of the background people are non-actors who are just kind of there. They do that quite well, but also the punks are dressed up like Night on the Town punks in like the full like high fashion bondage gear and rips and tatters, and David's got this like denim vest with studs and a leopard print collar that he wears all the time. And so they appear to be like from an alternate world and era in a way that's quite strange for what is like clearly the early 90s in London.
Yeah, like, I mean, in the movie's defense in that point, firstly, like, some of that costuming is fantastic.
It's cool as shit, but it's, like, weird.
But secondly, like, if you go to London and, say, wander through Camden or surrounding boroughs, you will just see people who are dressed like that as their, like, day-to-day, I am going out to get milk sort of costumes. So I at least buy that.
Okay, fair.
But yeah, like to come back to what I think is one of the central things which makes this movie kind of weak is this sort of cowardice and a sort of like inability to pick a lane, right? Like, so we get a very strong setup at the start of the movie. You know, David, the titular punk, walks into the back of a theater and sees the titular princess performing the role of Juliet in Romeo and Juliet.
And to be clear, like, that bit is one of the bits that I again find very affecting. The first encounter between David and Rachel is the name of the princess.
Yeah.
Has this kind of like super real quality almost. It's very heightened in the way that like teenage love and teenage lust is.
Yeah, no, like it's very good, and it has this sort of like slightly like fantastical setup and payoff to it, which is quite nice. But like it also sets up with like, hey kids, this is a riff on Romeo and Juliet. Hey, this is a riff on Romeo and Juliet, and these two people are Romeo and Juliet, which is something that they play back on a bunch of times. There's a balcony scene. There's they make the point of having the antagonist. I can't remember what his name is. He's the oi punk, get away from my bird. I think it's time you met my mate Stan, Greaser character. They make the point of him having a leather jacket that has a stray cat on the back, so it's clear that he's supposed to be Tybalt. I just looked up on IMDb. He's actually credited as Stray Cat, so there you go. Yeah. So like they have all of these references, and like the drug dealer is called Monk, but there are two ways you can go with that depending on how much of a Shakespearean nerd you are. Like, the deep Shakespearean nerd version is to say, hey, we think like one of the series, because Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy, right? Like everybody dies at the end. It's a tragedy.
Yeah, and specifically, like it's a tragedy in the sense that, fatal flaw is a thing that people sometimes misunderstand. In the sense that they think you need to have a flaw within the character. Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy in the sense that the setup of the world, the way that the world is introduced in the prologue of the play, makes it clear that the circumstances that these characters are born in are going to kill them. You know that's going to happen. You get to watch it happen. They don't know what's coming, but you do, and you can see it before they do, and that's what makes it a tragedy, kind of.
Yeah, and so that's one reading. Another reading that people sometimes come up with is that this was meant to be a comedy or a drama until some point at which it was decided it was going to be a tragedy. That some people back on the back of saying, well, there are lots of setups to do, plot bits that could set up for comedy and this and that and the other. And in fact, it turns out as a tragedy, which is it's an interesting thought, but it would be one of the ways you could go if you held that view was to go, hey, look, this is Romeo and Juliet, but we're going to go down that path.
Yeah. Or that's an interesting reading, because I've always thought one of the strengths of Romeo and Juliet as a play is that it is a comedy until people start dying, and then everything goes wrong at once. And that switch of tones is one of the things that makes it effective. But continue with what you were saying.
Yeah. So that's the thing, right? That switch of tone is what makes people go, oh, actually, I think it was because that was the point in the script that people actually, this is going to be a tragedy. Let's go. So you could just go, actually, no, we're going to keep this a comedy and I don't know, play it as a Shakespearean comedy, which would be interesting. Or otherwise, you've set up that this is Romeo and Juliet. Everybody in your audience knows how that story ends. We are now just on the ride to get to that conclusion. Right? And so to a certain degree, a lot of the cases of I don't know, cowardice are things like the friend of David's who get cut up by Tybalt, Stray Cat, doesn't die. He isn't killed. He's just cut up, right?
Yeah. And the other friend who dies as a result of taking drugs that were supplied by Monk. And so I get what you're saying, and I think the other effect of that is that it's not the thing that makes Tybalt an antagonist in Romeo and Juliet is that he belongs to the orbit of the Capulets. I forget exactly how he connects, but basically he is team Capulet. He is part of that gang, and that's why he's immediately in conflict with Romeo, because Romeo's a Montague. And have I got that the wrong way around? Doesn't matter. The important thing is the family feud is still what is the cause of that antagonism, whereas in the world of the punk, it's just kind of dangerous to be a young person, and then Stray Cat comes in and starts cutting people up because he's a bad, violent guy.
Yeah, and it's that sort of stuff about where they're again. David is a lower middle class kid, and Rachel comes from wealth, and there might be some antagonism there. But it again, we get the setup but no payoff, right? That's not the that's not the two families in war.
That was a thing that I noticed actually the second time round, is that Rachel, the arc of their relationship is that they meet at this squat party. They immediately hit it off. They go out for a date and have a night of passion, and then Rachel goes back to her family, and David is accosted by Stray Cat, and the kind of like Tybalt fight, Tybalt's death stuff happens. At which point, like the kind of the stakes are raised, and we're into like third act disaster time, and this is like 10 minutes from the end of the movie, basically.
Yeah.
But when you get to see Rachel with her family, she becomes a lot less sympathetic in a way that I don't think was intentional. Like,
yeah,
she does this sudden, like, Halloween goth costume change. She's basically looked like a normal person up till that point. And, like, the implication is that she just had all of this shit lying around. Like, she comes out, she's wearing like ripped tights as a top underneath another, it's like a bustier or something, and like a really short kilt with like lots of belts and big boots, and she's cut her hair, I think, and restyled it, and she's wearing like this completely deranged makeup. And the implication is that she just had all of that shit there ready to go at the drop of a hat. She was like, I'm a punk now. And she had all of that stuff to do that complete personal style change. None of it looks like thrift shopped or anything. It looks like she went to a costume department and said, make me look like a punk. And a slightly clueless theatrical or TV costume department did that for her.
Yeah, and like I think like Rachel's character is a really interesting one to kind of again delve into the slightly odd bits of this movie, because again, like, I think what bugs me is there's a lot of setup and no payoff, because the movie itself seems confused about what it's trying to do. Because there is this, like, the setup of her as Juliet versus David's Romeo, but also like a weird like implication that she is interested in him because he'll really piss off her dad.
Yeah.
In like the most trite, like, daytime TV, like, rich girl plot line. Which again, right, like, you set up would be but like, that's also never paid off.
Yeah. I think the fundamental issue is that the movie doesn't really know where the pressure that drives the eventual Romeo and Juliet situation is. Like, it doesn't know where that's supposed to come from. And so it introduces Stray Cat as an antagonist, but like, aside from the fact that he's a murderously violent guy who carries a knife, he like there's no stakes there. Like, he is mad at David and David's friends because he's jealous about Rachel, but there's nothing systemic that forces them into one another's orbits. And he, like, him and his greaser bikey friends don't really exist in the movie as like an existential threat to the punks or anything like that. There's no sense that conflict between these groups is inevitable, except because David's hooking up with his ex-girlfriend.
Yeah, and like, it's not, we don't like even know anything about them. They just exist. Like, And again, I think what's useful is if you like contrast that against like just rewrite. If it was just a rewrite of Romeo and Juliet, what would happen is that character would be a stand-in for Tybalt, who murders Romeo's pal, and therefore Romeo goes to find him and kill him.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he takes a positive action. While in the movie, like, David's just doing stuff, and Stray Cat chases him, like, by accident finds him, and they just kind of, you know, because he's chased him, he, you know, they fight, right? Like, and then they fight because...
And I have to talk about the fight as well, because, like, what happens is that Stray Cat attacks David with a Stanley knife. And I want to say, like, as far as low-budget, socially realist fight scenes, this is grimy and nasty. And, like, getting cut with a Stanley knife looks fucking terrible. And it should. But, like, David gets cut once and then does, like, a kung fu turnaround and stabs Stray Cat with his own knife. And the only setup for that is that during a conversation, which has this very jokey, flirtatious tone, like half an hour previous, he offhandedly says to Rachel, "Oh yeah, I did all the martial arts, Kung Fu, Wing Chun, Jackie Chan," which makes it clear that he's joking. You know, like he's trying to impress her both, like, by being a bit boastful and also by deliberately getting that wrong, because it's also established that one of the things that draws them together is that they are both movie people who know movie stuff. So, like, making a reference to Jackie Chan is, like, clearly deliberate. And then at the very end of, well, not quite at the very end, but, you know, like in this climactic fight scene, it is... It just turns out that was set up for him actually being like a skilled martial artist kind of out of nowhere, because he's never got into a fight up till that point. So we've never had that demonstrated to us.
Yeah, and like I just had quite a big realization, and I think it's one of the things that like kind of bugged me about this movie is the end point of this movie. Like, if you take this movie and try and do like a hero's journey or a, like, you know...
And just to be clear, like, the hero's journey is bullshit on many levels. It's just a handy lens occasionally for looking at things.
A handy lens, like, but like, we want stories where people learn and grow and do, you know, like, that something of import happened in the story. Somebody learned something, somebody takes home something. And if you look at this movie through that thing, the protagonist of this movie is not David or Rachel, it's David's dad.
Yeah, and he gets hardly any time. He's a copper who is, like, the movie kind of can't make up its mind how sympathetic it is towards him, because he picks on David in a way that's quite nasty, but also David's a little shit to him kind of out of nowhere. And it's not like his dad has just decided to be a cop and and David has just decided to be a punk. It's established that these are like a long-standing way of the world. And David gets a little bit of voiceover trying to kind of set it up, but like it doesn't really do the job. And so, like, the it can't really decide how sympathetic it is to him. But you're right, like the the person who grows and changes and learns a thing is him learning not to be a complete shithead about David, who doesn't really learn the same about him. It's not like they learn mutual respect.
Yeah, David, again, right? We don't have any learning something and then learning something different, or it again, right? Take homes are not necessary for a good film, but if you're writing your first script, maybe think about, hey, what's the take home? What do people walk out of the theater going, oh, right, the thing here was.
And again, I just want to make kind of a secondary point, which is that you don't necessarily have to have your characters learn and grow. They can not do that, and that can be the point. There's a sort of tradition I would point to, like Billy Liar, but there are other versions of it where the point is that a character is an awful person or makes all these grandiose claims or something, and the point is that you watch them not follow through and not change, and the world reacts to them either continuing to be shitty or not doing the thing they said they were going to do or whatever. And that's the point, is that this character is archetypally unable to learn from their experiences.
Or Yojimbo, or whatever the version of that as a Western is, right? The point of that is the Ronin isn't is Ronin, and they can't stay there. So at the end of the movie, they move on to probably repeat this, with the feeling that they're going to repeat this again and again and again.
But in Yojimbo, what happens is that the man comes to town. That's the archetypal setup. The man comes to town, and then town is changed, even though he is not changed.
But yeah, that kind of was my feeling. Is just it's hard to there are lots of setups and no payoffs, and then the other really puzzling thing is just the subline with Monk, who is this drug dealer who exists. And again, it feels like they are a stand-in for something, but we never really find out what.
No, Monk exists to provide an air of menace at the start of the movie, because he provides the drugs that kill one of David's friends, and he's shown kind of hovering around the edge of scenes, being seedy and vaguely threatening and pushing stuff on people, and all the scenes where what's achieved in terms of momentum and plot and setting stuff up by him doing that is purely establishing that David doesn't do drugs, so that at the end of the movie, when he decides to do drugs, in kind of desperation at being isolated and feeling like he's doomed, that we understand that it's going to be especially dangerous for him because he doesn't know what he's doing, basically. But you're right. As a character, he doesn't really have any motivation except for sell drugs. And then he shows up towards the end and tries to help David out, and he does it quite altruistically. He does give David drugs in the course of doing that, but he doesn't. It's not looking for a customer so much as, you look like you're in shit shape and you're fucking bleeding all over the place. How about you have the only painkiller that I happen to have to hand?
Yeah, there's also, I'm not sure if it was intentional, gay coding, but he feels really like he's trying to pick up David a lot of the time. Yeah,
I think it's because he's kind of softly insistent and kind of wheedling in the way that he's trying to push the drugs. I do feel like that's unintentional. I think it's just. I mean, look, if I had to stake money on it, right? I would go. Mike San, this guy who last directed a movie in 1970, is trying to do one in 1993, and he's trying to be topical. And like, what's topical? Okay, well, there's the burgeoning rave scene, which kind of was like a late 80s, early 90s phenomena in Britain, if I understand it rightly.
Yeah.
And part of mainstream opinion about that was the kind of moral panic about the increasing prevalence of particularly like MDMA and its derivatives, your ecstasy and so on. And so Monk is an attempt to be topical and modern, because aside from like the weird, like wheedling, seedy, as you say, like weirdly gay-coded stuff, his look and vibe compared to David and the Punks' outfits is like, he's very much like a 90s raver. Like, he's wearing like the baggy tracksuit and the baseball cap, and he's got like buzzed short hair. Like, you could see him like gurning and doing the weird moves in a like basement rave, while like music that goes plays.
Yeah, like I was just about to say, like now we talk about it. He feels like he's from like in a sort of character design way, in a like a look and actions way. He feels like he's from a different movie, like he's wandered in from like the set next door.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think like so does Stray Cat, right? Stray Cat is like a 90s exploitation movie biker. Like Stray Cat is from one of the less bizarre trauma movies. He feels like, almost. I mean, he's not American, he's British, but like he feels like a kid's drawing of a bad biker. And David's mother, who we haven't talked about yet, but she's like portrayed as like an immigrant. She's supposed to be like Italian or Spanish or something Mediterranean. It's never quite clear. And she has a mental breakdown, which is more kind of Ophelia than anything from Romeo and Juliet. But David goes to visit her in the mental health unit after she's had her breakdown, which is precipitated by him leaving home. And that felt like it was supposed to be social realist, but her version of madness is very like stage Shakespearean. Like, she's got the crazy Ophelia hair and like little bits of like weird glittery shit tied in it. And she's very like wide eyes and delivery like this. And again, like, it's not that wouldn't necessarily work, but it's in a different movie. It's in like an actual straight Shakespeare adaptation, that performance.
Or even just like if like, and I guess this is the thing, right? Like, none of these things were by themselves like a bad idea, right? Like, if you wanted to, you could make like Romeo plus Juliet, right?
I do think that it's worth mentioning that movie came out like 3 years later, and that probably somewhat contributes to the obscurity of this movie, because like, we saw this movie about the time that Romeo plus Juliet came out. Like, that's the point at which it was like on TV, maybe a year or so before. I forget exactly how old I was when I saw it. It was somewhere between like 14 and 16. So that puts it like 1995 to 1997. But
like one of the ways that movie deals with like how do you transport the whole Capulets and Montague thing onto the stage is like having very stylized costumes for everybody so that you can kind of look at a character and go, oh, they are one of them. They are one of them. Like, you could have done that here. You could like, oh, we have the punks and we have like the foreign and rich people. Like, you know, we have the Americans,
the punks,
for instance.
the bikers, the yuppies. These are all tribes with a distinct visual identity. And like are presented as like a power block in the city or something.
Yeah, like the cops, right? Like, you could do that. But again, the movie just doesn't quite make it there. Right? Like it kind of like all of the punks are punky, the bikers are bikey, but that's not set up as like as opposed tribes. Like those are just kind of people moving through the normal world. And yeah.
And by the same token, I think you could, like, if you imagine this movie, now the guy's name's gone out of my head. Who's the guy, British social realist filmmaker made My Name is Joe, Ken Loach.
There we go.
Right. You could imagine this movie being like the Ken Loach version of itself, where it is like nothing but grim social realism, and there is some sort of systemic force that creates the Romeo and Juliet relationship, and you get to see these two people come together and fall in love and then be crushed by like systemic forces beyond their control.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. Like, you could also have made that movie.
Yeah, no, entirely. And like, yeah, it just, again, like, there are lots of places this movie takes one step towards, and then, like, it feels like it stops and just kind of, you know, twiddles its thumbs and goes, ooh, it looks a bit dangerous down there. Better not.
Yeah, and so, like, again, like I said at the start, I don't know what happened, right? Like,
yeah.
It feels to me like something happened, but maybe it simply did not connect, and that is the deal. But maybe one of the things that happened is, if you look at the IMDb page for this, you see that Michael San is credited as the writer based on the they call it a novel, but it's really a novella, if that,
yep.
by Gideon Sams. I wonder if it's this 60s guy attempting to be hip with the kids, and that's like, it's just a kind of, I don't know, a kind of 60s cowardice married with like this, as I say, like very 60s guy doing like, hello, fellow kids.
Yeah, or like a kind of yeah, like just like yeah, yeah, it does. It's weird because, as you say, occasionally it gets very good reads on kind of weird young person interactions, right? A lot of the stuff of punks being rowdy young lads and causing disruption just to cause disruption feels very true. As you say, the bits where Rachel and David are given space to act as like dopey kids falling in love is again really good. So like there are lots of bits of this where it's like yeah, like that lands pretty well, but like overall structurally, as you say, like there's this weird "don't do drugs, kids" thing. There's some other stuff happening. Just like what was going on? What was the point?
Yeah, no, that is exactly right. And if there were a thing to recommend this movie, because we are getting to time, so we should probably round things off. But if there were a thing to recommend this movie, the thing that stuck in my head and that came through again on this rewatch is that it looks like Charlie Creed Miles and his other like young actor, co-actor, I guess, mates, co-stars, whatever, they look like they're having just the best time getting to make a movie. Like, all of the incidental fucking around where they like go play snooker in a pub and get into a pool cue sword fight with yuppies, or do a weird little beatboxing dance fight at the bus stop for no reason, or just like fuck around in a football stadium after they've found out that their mate died from a drug overdose. Like, all of that stuff is incredibly charming, and looks like they're just having a great time bouncing off one another. And the chemistry between Rachel and David is real and really powerful. And the scenes where they just like have rambling conversations that go nowhere. And there's an interesting thing where like you don't see jump cuts in movies that often, but they use it in this movie to indicate the passage of time and indicate that they're having this long rambling conversation. Like Rachel and David are sat at a restaurant table talking about their lives and the stuff they like and all this stuff. And then it'll really like jarringly jump cut to just later in the same conversation to kind of show you how they're spending time just kind of talking about nothing and being comfortable with each other. And for a very weird editing choice, it actually kind of works.
Yeah. Yeah, no, like I guess the thing is, this feels like a like what's kind of curious is that like Michael Sarn had done other like work before he did this, because it does feel like really first movie-ish, right? Like this is like a pretty good first attempt. There's lots of really good stuff, like a lot of as you say, when the actors are given space to do their thing, they do it very well, especially when they're given space to play, which are like, again, it feels like a lot of the stuff was just like, oh, it turns out like these two actors can like break dance. Let's just chuck some of them kind of break dance beatboxing in there because they can. Yeah. And there's like some great, like, just really like London in there, right?
Yep.
Like it's just
and the reason that it warped the speech patterns of us and our friends is that, particularly in the kind of establishing scenes early on, there's lots of moments where, and I have a theory, which we will maybe get to in a second, but where like seemingly off the cuff things from actors are very memetically powerful and quotable. There's like there's a couple of David's mates just chatting at the side of us, kind of incidentally at the side of the scene, and they have this little exchange where they go, tasty, tasty, very tasty, very tasty. And it's just kind of infectious, you know?
Yeah.
So I guess my theory, which we will never have proved, is that Michael San, and interestingly, again, if you look at IMDb, a lot of the like other production team is there are other Sans. So there's like a William San who's an associate producer. Michael San's a producer as well as director and main writer. Like there's a lot of that stuff going on, which makes me wonder if it's Michael San's like, attempt to reestablish relevance. My theory is that Michael San wrote a dog of a movie And the bits that don't work are what's left of his original vision. The reason I say this is because Michael San is like, his heyday is quite removed from the time and place that this movie takes place in. And also he appears to be kind of a shithead. If you go and read his Wikipedia article, he's like on record as having both had an affair with and been physically abusive to actresses on movies that he made in the 60s. Like, nasty. Anyway, my theory is that he made kind of a dog of a movie and had the luck of working with quite talented and charismatic young actors with whom I think he was justifiably enchanted. And so he gave them a lot of space to do stuff and left a lot of that them doing stuff in. And all the stuff about the movie that works is really like driven by the cast and them fucking about, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, like it again, it like occasionally feels very much like a what is the word? Like a collection of actors, an ensemble piece, right? Like it has some of the feelings of an ensemble piece, because as you say, like there's just bits that go on to other bits. But yeah, like I think that seems like a reasonable shout. Like it was Michael Sarn trying to write an adaptation of what people like widely accept is not a great book.
And to be clear, like the book has a doomed love story in it, but that's really the only connection it has to Romeo and Juliet. It's not, if you find it and read it, which you can, it's on the internet for free. The author, I would say, is Gideon Sams. It's not, it doesn't come off as a studied attempt to do a Romeo and Juliet thing. It's got a punk who falls in love with a girl and then they both die. But mostly what it is a bunch of stuff that Gideon Sams observed about punks that he thought was cool when he was 14. And in opposition with what he calls Teds. And I mean, like the punks versus Teds thing, I understand was real, but like it's not Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
So the connections there have been like a surface observation was made, and then they tried to make something bigger of it. Is what I'm saying.
Oh, I see. Yeah, like yeah, no, like it. Then yeah, like there's this book that maybe had some fame around 1993 that was like quickly tried to turn into a movie to get some push off it, and then like stumbled into having some competent actors take part, and kind of again when they when they manage to have free reign to act, they kind of pull this movie back.
Yeah. So, by way of finishing things off, do we have any recommendations? Would we recommend that people go and watch this movie if you can? Because to be clear, we had to find a pirated copy on a dubious website. The quality of it is disastrously bad. It's, as we said at the start, taped from TV and then digitized poorly. So, it's not going to be a glorious high fidelity viewing experience. There may be tapes out there floating around. It certainly existed in video shops back when VHS video stores were a thing, but I've never seen it anywhere since.
Yeah, no, like again, like I'm not sure it's worth hunting high and low for, but if you are stuck somewhere and it's on an old VHS, it might be worth watching.
Yeah, I mean, not to extend this show past its already overextended runtime too much further, but I did find it fascinating that in the age of, as Cory Doctorow puts it, Etowah, everything that ever was available forever, there are some things which are simply not, and this is one of them. Like, you can find it if you put in the effort and know where to look. But, this briefly, moderately successful cult romantic drama film from the 90s, you have to put in the same kind of effort as people who want to watch beheadings and shit,
Yeah, or just find I've been listening to a lot of Eleanor Yagana talking about medieval stuff, and the kind of the way that people investigate medieval things. You have to kind of turn up a lot of rocks to see if somebody put it somewhere weird and then completely forgot about it, right? You'd have to kind of find the one stream of it which is still available somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, with that thoroughly reserved recommendation out of the way, is there anything else that you would recommend if people have found this conversation interesting? I mean, obviously, if you have not watched the Baz Luhrmann Romeo plus Juliet, you should. It's probably the best modern adaptation, I would say. Yeah. Simply because of Baz Luhrmann's proclivities. Like, Baz Luhrmann is a guy who will never give you less than the dials up to 11 on everything. And for Romeo and Juliet, that's kind of the right vibe.
Yeah. If I thought better about this, I'd try and dig out another alternative Romeo and Juliet, which is I'm sure there is another good one.
Franco Zeffirelli's 1970s one. Again, very lurid and over the top. Italian director from the 70s, has Olivia Newton-John in it, I believe, kind of pre-stardom, and a quite a good take on Mercutio, which is kind of fun. I'm sure there's some other pretty good punk-based movies as well, if you're looking for some London punk vibes. But again, they've gone out of my head. I mean, if you do want social realism, just watch Ken Loach. Just be prepared to
make sure you prepare some aftercare afterwards. Yeah, but watch some Ken Loach movies.
You're going to get violently kicked in the soul, but if you want to know that it's grim out there, he'll fucking tell you that it's really grim out there. Finally, is there anything that you want people to be aware of and or plug? I would like to plug the ongoing climate disaster. Please do something about it.
Yeah, please. Not really. Everything is everything. Go find some way of offering mutual aid to those people around you.
Yeah.
Get to know your neighbors, join a WhatsApp group.
Yeah, all of those things. And I suppose by way of putting in a very last recommendation, because she mostly worked in TV, it's a bit of a mission to follow Vanessa Haddaway's later career, but follow Charlie Creed Miles' later career. He reliably does a good job in the places where he turns up. He's in The Fifth Element of all goddamn things, and watch Wild Bill. Wild Bill is about a guy who made a life in crime by being very good at violence, trying not to do violence once he gets out of jail, and trying to build a life without being very good at violence. And I dug it, and I think it's a good indication of what we missed out on through Charlie Creed Miles not being a big leading man.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Reserved Recommendations, a radio show and podcast from Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. The show was produced and presented by me, Hugh Dingwall, and I also composed our theme music. It's called Sack Jazz, and you can find it at wolfboy.bandcamp.com. If you enjoyed this show, why not go ahead and share it with a friend? You can find the last 10 episodes at npr.nz/show/reserved or wherever else you get your podcasts. If you want an episode older than that, try searching for Reserved Recommendations on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter at Objective Realty, or you can follow the show on Facebook. And finally, Manawatu People's Radio is a non-profit community access station. If you like this or any other piece of their fine audio programming, why not fling them $1 or $2? You can go to npr.nz/donate for more information on how to do that.